Hello, we've reached 1989, the end of the decade and a tough year to pick apart. Globally, politically, a lot happening. The beginning of the end of apartheid in South Africa, the breakup of the Eastern Bloc, the Berlin Wall falling, Tiananmen Square. But if you looked at the pop charts, some blips, yeah, but business as usual in a lot of respects. Madonna, Phil Collins, Stock Aitken and Waterman, the New Kids. In a musical sense, 1989 was an iceberg year. 90% of the interesting stuff was going on just below the surface. The cultural status quo was slowly beginning to shift. I think 89 was the last of the big tribal pop years. The indie kids, metalheads, b-boys, ravers, skaters, goths, punks, crusties, casuals. And within the space of a year or two, it felt like everything was on the menu, everything up for grabs. Metal crowds discovered grunge, indie bands found dance beats, hip-hop started sampling the hitherto unsamplable. Jazz, metal, Steely Dan. Dance remixes became ubiquitous, and even the hooligans were getting loved up in that elongated second summer of love. Manchester, indie dance, shoegaze, grunge, acid house, ambient house, soul to soul, heady days, and still all pre-internet, pre-streaming, fully physical. I was 17 and soaking up as much as I could. The rave thing hadn't reached my corner of the valleys, but my live music cherry had been well and truly popped, and I wanted more. I was lining up to be the first person in my family to go to university. These were the days, sadly it seems no more, when the state, governments, society saw the value in young people, and you could study for free anywhere you liked, provided you could get the grades. No fees, grants for your living costs, benefits during holidays, subsidised travel. In retrospect, I was very lucky. My grades weren't going to be a problem. I was encouraged to try for Oxbridge, but I had other ideas. I wanted distance. I didn't want some stuffy heritage institution. Somewhere big, but not scary big. And most importantly, somewhere with good music venues, a thriving scene, somewhere on the circuit. The NME Gig Guide was as valuable to me as any booklet or prospectus, and after some research and a visit, I fell for UEA. That's the University of East Anglia in Norwich. 250 miles from home, a modernist 60s campus, a great biology department. It boasted a great venue in its own right, the LCR, and an indie night called Wild Club had started up recently at the city's arts centre. But that would be next year. That would be 1990. In 89, I studied hard. I listened hard, and I watched a lot of snub TV on BBC Two, which debuted early this year. Okay, on with the music, I guess, and this year's nearly men and women. First up, New Order's Technique, their Ibiza-fueled masterpiece, second only to Power, Corruption and Lies in my book. And a pair, Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique and De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. Both gleefully inventive sampling showcases, full of wit and vision, and just irresistibly funky golden age hip-hop genius. In the noisy corner, No Means No's brilliant, wrong, a jazz hardcore barn burner. Band of Susan's Drones via the Stones exercise, that's Love Agenda. Nirvana's Bleach, their debut and still the one Nirvana album I reach for first when I want to hear them nowadays. And also, true story this, an album I won in a mail order competition. This is Lick by the Lemonheads, poppy, punky, scrappy. I still have a huge soft spot for this one. Some dreamier, moodier stuff. Yeah, The Cure's Disintegration, the apex of their 80s musical journey. A huge hit, dark, textured, introspective and massive sounding. Also Galaxy 500's wonderful On Fire, foggy, stumbling, psychedelic, pulsing pop with a velvet's edge. My CD has gone rotten without any explanation and I'm mortified. And last but not least, Love is Hell by Kitchens of Distinction. And how much did I love this band back in the day? Well, a lot actually. A lovely record. Prize is one of the great early shoegaze dream pop singles of this period. And it's on here. Big up Julian Swales too, the great forgotten guitar hero of first wave shoegaze. And here's where things got dead tricky. I had it down to a pair. The thumbnail probably gives that away. Inseparable at first, but after some deep memory dredging, I finally managed to call it. Spoiler first though, neither of these was, ta-da, the Stone Roses debut. I just never got them. This was considered heretical back in the day. Bless him, Neil Kulkarni, he got it. Still a minority view in the here and now, but that's my position, and I'm sticking to it. My list of crimes doesn't end there, though, I'm afraid, because in that final fatal shootout, who actually ended up bleeding out in the dust? Yep, it was Doolittle by the Pixies. Please understand, I love Doolittle. I loved Doolittle then, but it's a casualty resulting from some honest reflection on where I was in 1989 and another album that spoke to me in terms I could relate to in a more personal way. Because Doolittle, truth be told, is just a record full of incredible songs. Sweet melodies, violent, biblical, apocalyptic imagery, structural twists, skin-freezing screams, sex, drugs, injury detail. It reads like one of those movie advisories that flash up to warn viewers of a more sensitive disposition. And of course, what you don't expect are the poppier moments, amongst the Lynchian tropes, the Here Comes Your Man or a La La Love You. But no, think Tame, Hey, Gouge Away, Monkey Gone to Heaven. This would be many people's album of the year, and understandably so, barring the few holdouts who were hankering after more of the Albini-engineered rawness of Surfer Rosa instead. The one that, for me, beat out Doolittle was the solo debut of someone who was working through things following a very damaging breakup and coming to terms with the emotional fallout of what had been a difficult few years. It's the sound of someone letting it all out, working through the depression, the hurt, betrayal he was feeling and trying to move on. I didn't fully realise it at the time, but I was kind of going through something very similar myself. Anyway, here it is, my choice for 1989. This is Workbook by Bob Mould. And in a lot of ways, one to file alongside Disintegration, another record steeped in sadness and solitude, where Robert Smith amped everything up, layers on layers of sound, a huge canvas to project onto. Mould pulls everything back. There's a folky intimacy, a crisp, chilly spareness, a sound almost perfectly mirrored in the artwork on the rear of the sleeve. A visibly diminished Mould sat alone on a simple stick chair in the centre of an empty farmhouse room. Stark monochrome, with a spindly tree, the only thing visible through the snowy whiteout of the Minnesota winter outside. It's a cleaner, clearer sounding record than anything Husker Du had ever put down. The production does steer away from punk rock and tiptoe around 80s adult contemporary territory. But to anyone who doesn't like it purely because of that 80s production, I have some news for you. It was recorded in the 1980s. Deal with it. Bob had, locked away in that northern Minnesota farmhouse, been listening to a lot of folk music, Appalachian oldies, as a palate cleanser after the Huskers breakup, and that definitely informs a lot of what you hear on Workbook. But the big folk rock elephant in the room is the music of Richard Thompson of Fairport Convention, which apparently Mould was only introduced to after demoing a lot of the Workbook material. He was shocked by how much of his new songwriting eerily prefigured the stuff he was hearing for the first time. As recompense, penance, probably more as tribute, he would cover Thompson's Shoot Out the Lights on the Workbook tour, and a live take of this would be included as an extra track on the 12-inch single release of See a Little Light. A track which also happens to be the most hopeful, the most upbeat track on the whole album. I see a little light, I know you will. I can see it in your eyes, I know you still care. An airy, incandescent jig with Bob's vocals multi-tracked and harmonising joyously. I think it's one of Bob's greatest songs. I think it's a special one for him too. He used it as the title for his autobiography. But for someone whose guitar playing is so often the focus of his music, that break with the past, that beautiful blue Strat Plus he bought to relegate his trusty Huskers era Flying V to the cupboard under the stairs, it's the vocals on Workbook that hit hardest for me. The space in the mix afforded by the more focused, clearer guitar tones allows Bob to spray folky vocal harmonies and counter melodies across the entirety of the album. The keening responses floating behind the delicate pulsing beat of Heartbreaker Stranger. The ghostly rounds of the hymn-like droning sinners and their repentances. And the high-up multi-track backing in Compositions for the Young and Old. And the majestic fugue fantasy of Dreaming I Am. But all that musical space isn't wasted. Bob's elevation of the power trio format above all others remains undimmed on Workbook. Perubu's Tony Mamone on bass and the late Anton Fire on drums, both supporting with solidity, fluidity, sensitivity. The drums occasionally betray a whiff of that triggered 80s studio mindset, not overbearingly so, but Mamone's bass, it is wonderful, chunky and reassuring with some sublime little gurgly slides and intervals. Also beautiful additional cello throughout from Jane Scarpantoni. She featured on REM's World Leader Pretend on Green last week, but she's all over Workbook. But even-handed as I'm trying to be, Mould's guitar here is sublime throughout. From the trickling, sweetly resolving picking on the instrumental opener Sunspots, through to the splattery, bluesy carnage of the album's only indulgence, the pile-driving squall of closing track Whichever Way the Wind Blows, there are marvellous touches everywhere. The combination of scouring drone and melodic mirroring for his solo on Wishing Well is Pro Bowl Bob. Not an ounce of sweat wasted on pointless pyrotechnics. As a lead player, he always serves the underlying changes first, foremost, imbuing all his solos with a direction and focus that enhances the song every time. I've raved before about the tilted solo from Beaster, but this one from Wishing Well, it's right up there with it for entirely different reasons. Also, the waves of erupting harmonics and bends that punctuate Poison Years, the nimble, folky, almost fiddle-like kind of lead line he drops into Compositions, and the juddering, out of nowhere, handbrake turned chord change he throws into the breakdown section of Whichever Way the Wind Blows. The whole album's a masterclass in tasteful, impactful, melodic guitar interventions. Yet Workbook kind of stands alone in his post-Huskers work. Even the album directly following this one, 1990's Black Sheets of Rain, dialed up the distortion and oppressive heft. You'd barely know one followed the other only a year later. And given the amazing reception Sugar got a couple of years after that, it's easy to see how Workbook got parked over to the side a little, engine idling whilst, grunge put the pedal to the metal during the 90s. But it's a very special record, make no mistake. The sense of solitary reflection, of taking time out to be with yourself, your thoughts, your dreams, of taking stock, makes it as powerful a listen to me, The Wrong Side of 50, as it did to me at 17. Bob Mould or Fool's Gold? I still know which one I prefer. Some unexpected serendipity. By the time you see this, it's probably going to be the 2nd of May, which happens to be the 35th anniversary of Workbook's release. Well, that was its US release date anyway. In the UK, it came out in July, and I remember seeing that review in the NME from Deli for Deli. It was one of the things that convinced me to buy it. Yeah, in the music press of the late 80s, REM and Husker Du were always mentioned in the same breath, it seems. And Workbook feels as close together as those two bands ever got, sonically, tonally. Maybe that's why it still talks to me and why I had to give, Doolittle that gentle elbow at the end. Anyway, Workbook, Doolittle, what do you think? Maybe you prefer something else entirely. Let me know down below what your choice for 1989 would be. Briefly too, these videos have been running a little longer over this kind of short period of years. I'm hoping to get back to some kind of slightly shorter takes once we get into the 90s. But that is it for this time. If you've liked the video, please think about giving it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. And that's it. Yeah, please do take care, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.